Microeconomics, Module 9, Monopoly. Why it matters. If perfect competition is at one end of the competitive spectrum, at the other end is monopoly. A monopolist is a single supplier, the only firm in an industry. Monopolies have monopoly power, which is the ability to set the market price. Consider the following questions. What prevents a monopoly from charging an infinite price? What is similar about the model of monopoly compared to perfect competition? What is different about the model of monopoly compared to perfect competition? A monopoly is a firm that supplies all of the output in a market. A monopoly faces no significant competition. It can charge any price it wishes. Examples of monopolies: in the past, U.S. Postal Service, your local electric and garbage collection companies, a pharmaceutical firm that sells a particular drug and has a patent. For a time, Microsoft was considered a monopoly. How monopolies form: barriers to entry. With little to no competition, monopolies tend to earn a significant economic profit. Profits would attract vigorous competition, but because of barriers to entry, they do not. Barriers to entry: the legal, technological, or market forces that discourage or prevent potential competitors from entering a market. Two types of monopoly: legal monopoly, laws prohibit or severely limit competition; natural monopoly, the barriers to entry are something other than legal prohibition. Legal monopoly: for some products, the government erects barriers to entry by prohibiting or limiting competition. A patent gives the inventor the exclusive legal right to make use or sell an invention for a limited time. A trademark is an identifying symbol or name for a particular good. Example, Nike swoosh. A copyright, form of legal protection to prevent copying for commercial purposes, original works, or authorship, including books and music. Trade secrets are methods of production kept secret by the producing firm. Example, Coca-Cola formula. Intellectual property is the combination of patents, trademarks, and copyrights, and trade secret law. Natural monopoly occurs where the economics of an industry naturally leads to a single firm dominating the industry. Economies of scale and sole ownership or control of a natural resource are two common examples of natural monopoly. Economies of scale is when a firm faces decreasing long-run average costs as its level of output increases. Economies of scale can combine with the size of the market to limit competition. Barriers to entry. Natural monopoly, government often responds with regulation. Example, water and electric companies. Control of a physical resource, there's no government role. De Beers is an example with diamonds. Legal monopoly, government role, yes. Post office, past regulation of airlines and trucking. Patent, trade, and copyright, government role, yes, through protection of intellectual property. Examples, new drugs or software. Another barrier to entry, intimidating potential competitors. Is there a government role? Somewhat. Example, predatory pricing, well-known name brands. Demand curves perceived by a perfectly competitive firm and by a monopoly. The pattern of costs for the monopoly can be analyzed within the same framework as the costs of a perfectly competitive firm. Because there's no competition for a monopoly, the decision process will differ from a perfectly competitive firm. The horizontal demand curve means that a perfectly competitive firm could sell either a relatively low or relatively high quantity. Total cost and total revenue for a monopolist. Total costs for a monopolist follow the same rules as for perfectly competitive firms. Total costs increase with output at an increasing rate. Total revenue, though, is different from perfect competition. Monopolists face a downward sloping demand curve. In order to keep selling output, it must reduce the price. Selling more output raises revenue but lowers the price, and you can see that in this chart. Marginal revenue and marginal cost for a monopolist. In the real world, a monopolist often does not have enough information to analyze its entire total revenues or total costs. A firm doesn't know what would happen if it were to alter production dramatically. However, a monopolist can use information on marginal revenue and marginal cost. Marginal cost, the change in total cost for a change in quantity produced. Marginal revenue, change in total revenue for a change in quantity sold. Choosing the price. A firm's demand curve shows the maximum price a firm can charge to sell any quantity of output. Graphically, start from the profit maximizing quantity, which is where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. That sets the quantity produced. The place on the demand curve Where you are at that quantity produced is going to tell you the price. You can read it off the demand curve and go across to the vertical axis. Computing monopoly profit. Step 1. The monopolist determines its profit maximizing output level, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. In this case, it looks to be 5. Step 2. The monopolist decides what price to charge. From that quantity of 5, go up to the demand curve and go across and read the price. Step 3, calculate total revenue, total cost, and profit. So the difference is price times quantity, that's total revenue, and then total cost is going to be the average total cost at that quantity. So multiply those two and subtract to get the profit. The inefficiency of monopoly. Most people criticize monopolies because they charge too high a price. Economists object to this because they do not supply enough output to be allocatively efficient. Remember, allocative efficiency is an economic concept regarding efficiency at the social or societal level. It refers to producing the optimal quantity of some output. Price discrimination and efficiency. Price discrimination means charging different prices to different customers for the same product. An example, sales at retail stores. 3 things are necessary for effective price discrimination. Need to have market power, need to be able to sort the customers into who is willing to pay a higher price and who is not. Customers can't resell the product. Corporate mergers. A corporate merger occurs when 2 formerly separate firms combine to become a single firm. When one firm purchases another, it is called an acquisition. In an acquisition, the newly purchased firm may operate under the former name. Mergers can also be lateral, where 2 firms of similar sizes combine to become one. Mergers and acquisitions both lead to separate firms being under common ownership. Regulations for approving mergers. The laws that give government the power to block certain mergers and even in some cases to break up large firms into smaller ones are called antitrust laws. The U.S. government approves most proposed mergers. In a market-oriented economy, firms have the freedom to make their own choices. Private firms generally have the freedom to expand or reduce production, set the price they choose, open new factories or sales facilities close to them, or close them, hire workers or lay them off, start selling new products or stop selling existing ones. The 4-firm concentration ratio. Calculating concentration ratios from market shares. If the market shares in the market for replacing automobile windshields are Smooth as Glass Repair Company, 16% of the market, Auto Glass Doctor Company, 10% of the market, Your Car Shield Company, 8% of the market, 7 firms that each have 6% of the market, 42% of the market combined, 8 firms that each have 3% of the market, 24% of the market combined, then the 4-firm ratio, concentration ratio, is 16 plus 10 plus 8 plus 6, which equals 40. Regulators have struggled for decades to measure the degree of monopoly power in an industry. An early tool was the concentration ratio, which measures what share of the total sales in the industry are accounted for by the largest firms, typically the top 4 to 8 firms. Here we have the HHI index, and it's calculated by summing the squares of the market share of each firm in the industry. So if you go through and take a look at these industries, here's how you would calculate it. Calculate the HHI for a monopoly with a market share of 100%. That's step 1. So 100 squared would be 10,000. Step 2, calculate the HHI for an industry with 100 firms that each have 1% of the market. In this case, it would be 100 times 1 squared, which equals 100. Step 3, calculate the HHI for the industry. The HHI is 16 squared plus 10 squared plus 8 squared plus 7 times 6 squared plus the 8 times 3 squared. You get 744. Step 4, note that the HHI gives greater weight to larger firms. Step 5, consider an example given earlier. The HHI for the industry is 5 times 20 squared, or 2,000, while the HHI for the second industry is much higher at 77 squared plus 23 times 1 squared, or 5,952. Step 6, note that the near monopolist in the second industry drives up the HHI measure of industrial concentration. Step 7, review Table 2, which gives some examples of the 4-firm concentration ratio and the HHI in various industries. Regulating anti-competitive behavior. U.S. antitrust laws regulate a wide array of anti-competitive practices. It is illegal for competitors to form a cartel to collude to make pricing and output decisions as if they were a monopoly firm. The Federal Trade Commission and the U.S. Department of Justice prohibit firms from agreeing to fix prices or output, rigging bids, sharing or dividing markets by allocating customers, suppliers, territories, or lines of commerce. Under U.S. antitrust laws, monopoly itself is not illegal. Restrictive practices. Antitrust laws include rules against restrictive practices. Restrictive practices are practices that do not involve outright agreements to raise price or to reduce the quantity produced, but might have the effect of reducing competition. Types of restrictive practices are: a minimum resale price maintenance agreement requires the dealers to sell for at least a certain minimum price. An exclusive dealing, an agreement that a dealer will sell only products from one manufacturer. Tying sales happens when a customer is required to buy one product if the customer also buys a second product. More restrictive practices: bundling, a firm sells two or more products as one. Predatory pricing occurs when the existing firm or firms reacts to a new firm by dropping prices very low until the new firm is driven out of the market, at which point the existing firm raises prices again. The concept of restrictive practices is continually evolving as firms seek new ways to earn profits and government regulators define what is permissible and what is not. Regulating natural monopolies. Most true monopolies today in the U.S. are regulated, natural monopolies. A natural monopoly poses a difficult challenge for competition policy. The structure of costs and demand makes competition unlikely or costly. A natural monopoly arises when average costs are declining over the range of production that satisfies market demand. Typically, this happens when fixed costs are large relative to variable costs. As a result, one firm is able to supply the total quantity demanded in the market at a lower cost than two or more firms. The choices in regulating a natural monopoly. What is appropriate competition policy for a natural monopoly? The graph to the right illustrates the case of a natural monopoly with a market demand curve that cuts through the downward sloping portion of the average cost curve. Points A, B, C, and F illustrate the four main choices for regulation. The four main choices are: 1. Leave the natural monopoly alone. The monopoly will follow its normal approach to maximizing profits. 2. Antitrust authorities decide to divide the company so that the new firms can compete. 3. Regulators may decide to set prices and quantities produced for this industry. The regulators will try to choose a point along the market demand curve that benefits both consumers and the broader social interest. 4. Let the natural monopoly charge enough to cover its average cost and earn a normal rate of profit. The firm will continue to operate but won't raise prices and earn abnormally high monopoly profits. Cost plus regulation. Regulators of public utilities calculated the average cost of production for water and electricity. They added in an amount for a normal rate of profit and set the price accordingly for consumers. This method was known as cost plus regulation, or when regulators permit a regulated firm to cover its costs and to make a normal level of profit. Cost plus regulation raises difficulties of its own. If producers are reimbursed for their costs plus a bit more, then at a minimum, producers have less reason to be concerned with high costs. Firms under cost plus regulation even have an incentive to generate high costs by building huge factories or employing lots of staff. Price cap regulation. In the 1980s and 1990s, some regulators of public utilities began to use price cap regulation, where the regulator sets a price that the firm can charge over the next few years. A common pattern was to require a price that declines slightly over time. If the firm can find a way to reduce costs faster than the price caps, it can make a large profit. If a firm cannot keep up with the price caps or has bad luck in the market, it will suffer losses. Price cap requires delicacy. It won't work if the price is too low or too high. Doubts about regulation of prices and quantities. Beginning in the 1970s, it became clear to policymakers of all political leanings that the existing price regulation was not working well. So the U.S. government removed controls over prices and quantities in transportation, natural gas, and bank interest rates. One difficulty with government price regulation is what economists call regulatory capture, in which the firms supposedly being regulated end up playing a larger role in setting the regulations that they will follow. The result of regulatory capture is that government price regulation can often become a way for existing competitors to work together to reduce output, keep prices high, and limit competition. The effects of deregulation. The greater pressure of competition led to entry and exit. When firms went bankrupt or contracted substantially in size, they laid off workers who had to find other jobs. Market competition is a full contact sport. A number of scandals led to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. It was designed to increase confidence in financial information provided by public corporations to protect investors from accounting fraud. One response to the Great Recession in 2007 was the Dodd-Frank Act. It attempted major reforms of the financial system. Quick review. What are the characteristics of a monopoly? What are legal monopolies and what are some examples? How do economies of scale and the control of natural resources lead to natural monopolies? What is the difference between barriers to entry? How does a demand curve for a monopoly differ from a demand curve for a perfectly competitive firm? Analyze total cost and total revenue curves for a monopolist. What is marginal revenue and marginal cost in a monopoly, and how do you calculate it? What is the level of output the monopolist should supply and the price it should charge in order to maximize profits? How do you illustrate a monopoly's profits on a graph? What is allocative efficiency and its implications for a monopoly? What is price discrimination and why is it an allocatively efficient outcome? What are antitrust laws and regulations? How do you calculate concentration ratios and the HHI index? What is restrictive practices, including tying sales, bundling, and predatory pricing? What is the appropriate competition policy for a natural monopoly? What is the difference between cost plus and price cap regulation? What is the effectiveness of price regulation and antitrust policy? And that is all.